Emma had always believed silence was safer than facing the ache that lived in her chest. And on that gray Seattle evening, she tried to keep her thoughts quiet as she cleaned the small living room, pretending the soft rain tapping the windows was enough company. She had built her world on calm routines after losing her husband. And even though her stepson Ethan was now 25 and staying with her while recovering from a shoulder injury, she still felt like she tiptoed around him, unsure how to bridge the years of polite distance between them. That night, she didn't expect him to walk into the room looking tired and frustrated, rubbing the stiff muscles near his shoulder as if he had fought the pain all day. He hesitated in the doorway like someone trying to decide if speaking up was worth the risk. And Emma felt her heart skip because she rarely saw him unsure of himself. Ethan had always been quiet, private, the kind of young man who kept emotions locked behind calm eyes. But there was something different in his expression now, a mix of discomfort and hope that made Emma set down the blanket she had been folding. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but hesitant, telling her the physical therapist insisted he needed regular muscle work, and asking if she could help, just for a moment, because he couldn't reach the worst of the tension on his own. The request caught her off guard, not because it was inappropriate, it wasn't, but because it felt unexpectedly personal. Like stepping into a part of his life she had never been invited into before. She agreed because she cared about him and because refusing would feel cold. But she also felt her breath tighten as he sat on the couch and shifted so she could reach his shoulder. The room seemed smaller as she placed her hands gently against the tense muscle, trying to press just enough to ease the pain without hurting him. She focused on the movement of her palms, on the warmth of his skin through the fabric of his shirt, and on staying calm even though she hadn't been this close to someone in a long time. To her surprise, Ethan let out a shaky breath, not from pain, but from relief. Like he had been carrying more than just physical tension. Emma tried to stay professional, reminding herself she was simply helping someone she cared about heal. And yet she couldn't ignore how strange it felt to be sharing a quiet moment with a young man who had once barely spoken to her during family dinners. His injury had slowed him down, made him vulnerable. And for the first time she sensed how much he missed being strong and independent. As she continued working the knot in his shoulder, the atmosphere shifted. Not romantic, not strange, just unexpectedly honest, as if the space between them had opened enough for something real to be said. And then, just as she thought the moment was settling into something calm, Ethan spoke again, his voice lower, almost thoughtful, asking a question so unexpected and personal that Emma's hands froze in place and her heart thudded once, hard and fast. He didn't ask about the pain or the massage or anything to do with his recovery. Instead, he asked why she had stopped painting something she had not spoken about in years. Something she believed no one had noticed. Something tied directly to the grief she had kept buried since his father's passing. The question hit her like cold air, quick and sharp. Because she had locked away her art long ago, along with every piece of the woman she used to be. She felt her breath catch not from sadness but from surprise that Ethan had been paying attention all along. She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out, and the room felt suddenly heavy with memories she had tried to forget. Before she could recover, he continued speaking in a soft, sincere tone that made her chest tighten more than his earlier request had, telling her he remembered how alive she used to look when she painted and how his father once said, "Her art kept her breathing through the hardest days." Hearing those words she had not allowed herself to think about, pulled emotions she had buried to the surface too fast, too suddenly. She felt overwhelmed, unsteady, as if the world had tilted a little under her feet. She slowly pulled her hands back, not because she was uncomfortable with Ethan, but because the conversation had gone somewhere she wasn't prepared for. She realized then that the simple act of helping him had opened a doorway she had kept locked for years. She looked at Ethan, seeing not the quiet, distant young man she once struggled to connect with, but someone carrying his own grief, his own memories of the father they had both lost. Someone reaching out in the only way he knew how. Emma felt something new warming between them, not romance, Not anything forbidden, but a fragile healing connection built from shared loss and long-avoided truths. She didn't know what to say, so she simply stood there trying to steady her breath, wondering how a simple request for help had shifted the ground beneath her feet. It was just a massage, just a moment, yet it felt like the beginning of something she could not name. Something that made her wonder if her quiet life was about to change in ways she wasn't ready for. Emma tried to keep her focus steady as she worked on Ethan's shoulder, pushing gently into the tight muscle the way the therapist had taught him. But her mind kept jumping from thought to thought, trying to understand why this moment felt so strangely important. The room was quiet except for the soft rain and Ethan's careful breathing. And she could feel how hard he was trying not to show how much the pain bothered him. He had always been that way, strong on the outside, private on the inside. And she had grown used to giving him space because he never asked for anything. Tonight, though, he seemed different, as if the injury had forced him to slow down long enough to feel things he never said. Emma tried to distract herself by concentrating on the simple work of loosening the muscle. But Ethan suddenly spoke again, asking in a soft, almost curious voice why she had stopped painting. And the question hit her harder than anything she was prepared for. She froze, her hands hovering near his shoulder as if her body refused to move. Because that topic belonged to a part of her life she had locked away years ago. Painting had once been her world, her escape, the thing that gave her peace when nothing else did. But after losing her husband, she couldn't pick up a brush without feeling the weight of memories she wasn't ready to face. She never talked about it, never explained, and she didn't think anyone noticed she had stopped. Hearing Ethan bring it up so quietly made something inside her shift, as if he had reached into a place she thought no one could see. She tried to answer, but her voice caught, and before she could gather herself, he kept talking, saying he remembered watching her at the old dining table mixing colors while sunlight filled the room, saying she used to look calm and alive when she worked on a canvas. And then he added something that made her chest tighten even more. That his father once told him her art kept her breathing during the hardest days. The words cracked open the grief she had held down for so long. Not painfully, but honestly. And she felt tears building faster than she could hide. She stepped back a little, not wanting him to see how shaken she was, yet unable to pretend his question didn't matter. The room felt smaller now, filled with the ghost of the past she wasn't ready to face, but also filled with something surprising: Ethan's sincerity. He wasn't judging her. He wasn't pushing. He simply cared, and that simple truth pressed into her heart with quiet force. She looked at him, seeing more than the tired young man with an injured shoulder. She saw someone who had lost his father too. Someone who carried memories he didn't talk about. Someone who wanted to hold on to the parts of life that reminded him of happier times, even if they felt distant now. For the first time, their grief felt shared instead of separate, like two pieces of the same story finally touching. Emma sat down slowly on the edge of the coffee table, trying to breathe through the mix of emotions rising inside her. She didn't expect Ethan to care about her lost passion. Didn't expect him to notice something she had worked so hard to hide behind calm routines and polite smiles. She felt exposed, but also strangely relieved because someone had finally said out loud what she had been avoiding. She whispered that she stopped painting because it hurt too much, because every color reminded her of things she wasn't ready to remember. But her voice was shaky, unsure, and she wasn't even sure her explanation made sense. Ethan turned to face her carefully, still holding his injured shoulder, and he said he understood more than she thought. He talked about how his injury made him feel helpless, how losing his father made simple things feel heavy, how he sometimes felt stuck between wanting to move forward and wanting to hold on to what was gone. Hearing him open up like that surprised her even more, because Ethan rarely shared anything personal. His honesty made the room warmer, softer, and Emma felt her own walls shifting. She didn't know how their conversation had reached this point, but she could feel the distance between them shrinking in a way she never expected. She realized then that this wasn't just about painting or pain or memories. It was about two people trying to learn how to breathe again after their lives had been torn open. She reached for his hand without thinking, just a gentle touch, a quiet thank you for seeing her, and he didn't pull away. The moment wasn't romantic or complicated. It was human, simple, fragile, and it held more comfort than she had felt in years. But just when she thought she might finally find the words she wanted to say, Ethan shifted and winced, reminding her that his pain hadn't disappeared, and Emma felt the moment slip back into reality. She told him they could finish the massage later, that he should rest, but her heart was beating too fast to stay calm. She excused herself and walked down the hall, leaning against the wall for a moment to catch her breath, realizing that Ethan's quiet question had shaken something loose inside her, something she couldn't ignore anymore. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew that nothing between them would feel the same again, not in a wrong way, but in a way that felt like healing had finally taken its first breath. Emma couldn't sleep that night, her mind buzzing with everything that had happened during the massage and Ethan's unexpected question about her painting. Replaying every word, every pause, every look he had given her, as if they held secret meanings she wasn't ready to understand. The rain outside had slowed to a soft drizzle, but the sound of it against the windows felt louder than usual, matching the rhythm of her restless thoughts. She walked around the house, pouring herself a cup of tea, staring out at the wet streets of Seattle, wondering how a simple conversation had stirred emotions she had thought were long buried. For the first time in years, she felt a pull toward life that wasn't linked to routine or survival, a pull that reminded her she still had passions, still had choices, still had a chance to feel alive again. And yet that excitement was tangled with fear. A fear that opening herself to something new might hurt more than she was ready to face. She thought about Ethan constantly, not in the way a stepmother might with her stepson, but as someone who had suddenly revealed that he noticed her, that he remembered the parts of her life she had hidden, that he cared in a way that was quiet but profoundly real. That realization was thrilling and terrifying at the same time, because it reminded her of what it felt like to be truly seen. The next day, Emma tried to return to her usual routine, folding laundry, tidying up the kitchen, and making small meals, but every task felt hollow without the weight of that conversation lingering in her chest. Her thoughts wandered to painting, a hobby she had abandoned after her husband died. And she realized she had avoided her canvas not just out of grief, but because she was afraid of feeling vulnerable again. Ethan's words had cracked the surface of that fear. And she felt something shift inside her, a small spark of courage that had been dormant for years. She knew she couldn't ignore it, not anymore. But as she grappled with these emotions, another presence appeared in her life. Someone she hadn't expected, but who brought a warmth she hadn't realized she needed. Daniel, the neighbor who lived a few houses down, had been friendly before, a casual acquaintance from neighborhood gatherings. But over the past few weeks, his attentiveness had grown into something more meaningful. He would stop by to ask if she was okay, bring small gestures of kindness like freshly baked cookies or a warm smile, and ask questions about her day that made her feel noticed and appreciated. Daniel was patient, gentle, and thoughtful, and Emma found herself looking forward to seeing him, craving his company in a way she hadn't with anyone since her husband passed. But just as her heart started to tilt toward the possibility of connection with Daniel, thoughts of Ethan kept surfacing, and she felt confused by the emotional pull she couldn't explain. Ethan wasn't someone she could have romantic feelings for, of course, and she knew the boundary between them was clear and necessary. Yet the bond they had formed over shared grief and quiet honesty felt so strong it left her questioning how much of herself she had hidden from everyone else. She realized that what she felt for Ethan was complicated but not inappropriate. It was the relief of being understood. It's a comfort of having someone notice her heart again. It's the emotional intimacy of someone who could see past the surface and recognize her pain and her resilience. Meanwhile, Daniel's gentle attention reminded her of what it felt like to be admired, to be wanted in a wholesome, caring way. To imagine a future that included companionship and laughter and warmth after years of solitude. Emma felt herself being pulled in two directions, one toward the excitement of rediscovering life and her passions, the other toward the quiet, grounding connection she shared with someone who had been with her through the long years of family life. The tension between these feelings made her restless. Walking the house in the evenings, staring out at the rain-soaked streets, and thinking about what choices she had to make, what risks she could take. Then, one evening, Daniel appeared at her door, holding a small notebook and a guitar case. A nervous smile on his face as he asked if she would listen to something he had written for her. Emma's heart jumped, caught off guard by the unexpected attention and the vulnerability in his eyes. And she felt a rush of warmth and anticipation as she stepped outside to meet him. But just as she opened the door, Ethan walked into the hallway, still in recovery clothes, and watched quietly, a small, supportive smile on his face. He didn't say anything, just nodded at her as if to silently encourage her to accept this new moment in her life, reminding her that she had earned the right to feel joy, to take risks, to open her heart again. Emma realized in that instant that the confusion she felt wasn't a problem to solve, but a part of her healing, a sign that she had survived loss and was ready to embrace life again in ways she hadn't thought possible. Daniel strummed a soft chord on his guitar, and Emma felt a shiver of anticipation as he began to play a song he had written. Words and melody weaving through the night air and touching something deep inside her, filling her with hope, longing, and a quiet thrill she hadn't felt in years. Watching Daniel perform, Emma felt a release of all the tension she had been holding, the fear, the grief, the uncertainty, and she allowed herself to imagine a future that included laughter, connection, and love again. She realized that Ethan's support had been part of what gave her the courage to open her heart, that the bond they shared had reminded her she was worthy of care and attention, and that Daniel's presence offered the possibility of building something new and beautiful. By the end of the evening, Emma felt lighter than she had in years, her chest no longer tight with anxiety but open to possibility, her mind swirling with dreams she had thought were lost. And in that quiet moment, standing in the drizzle with the soft sound of guitar strings filling the night, Emma understood that she was no longer trapped by the past, that she could allow herself to feel deeply, to take risks, and to rediscover her passions. Starting with something as simple and honest as listening to someone sing for her, sharing a moment of vulnerability that had the power to change her life. She walked back inside, heart racing with anticipation for what tomorrow might bring, ready to face the complicated, beautiful mix of emotions that came with healing, love, and the first steps toward truly living again, knowing that she was not alone and that the path ahead, though uncertain, was filled with possibilities she could no longer ignore. The night Daniel came to Emma's door, guitar case in hand and a notebook tucked under his arm, it felt electric in a way she hadn't experienced in years. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, painting the streets with reflections of streetlights, and the air smelled faintly of wet pine and earth, familiar scents that reminded her of quiet walks she used to take to think. Daniel's smile was tentative, shy even, as he shifted from foot to foot, and Emma felt a thrill in her chest that startled her because she hadn't realized how much she had been craving human connection, how much she had starved for attention that was kind, respectful, and patient. Ethan was nearby, leaning against the doorway of the hallway, still cautious after his injury, but watching her with a supportive, encouraging expression that made her heart ache with gratitude. He didn't say a word, just stayed present, quietly reminding her that she had people who cared about her, people who wanted to see her happy. Daniel asked softly if she would listen to a song he had written, and Emma, heart racing, nodded before she realized it, her fingers curling around the doorframe as she tried to steady herself against the excitement and fear bubbling inside her. Daniel began to strum the chords light, careful, filled with an earnestness that made her feel like he was speaking directly to her soul. The song itself was simple, yet powerful, telling a story of hope, of beginnings, of someone finding the courage to step forward after years of fear, loss, and solitude. Emma felt tears prick her eyes as she listened, realizing that this small act of vulnerability, of sharing art in its purest form, was exactly what she needed to break through the wall she had built around her heart. The melody wrapped around her like a warm blanket, and she felt all the tension, all the anxiety that had held her frozen for weeks start to unravel in a way that was unexpected but deeply relieving. She glanced at Ethan, who gave her a small, encouraging nod, and she understood that he wasn't jealous or uncomfortable. He was witnessing her opening herself up again. Witnessing a moment of courage and honesty, and in his silent support she found even more strength. As Daniel's song came to a gentle end, he looked at her, his eyes wide with anticipation. And Emma realized she could finally let herself feel joy without guilt, that she could allow herself to take risks with her heart again, and that the moment didn't require her to have everything figured out. It only required her presence, her honesty, and her willingness to be vulnerable. The air seemed charged with possibility, and Emma felt the familiar tug of her old passions. The creative spark that had lain dormant since her husband died began to flicker awake. She thanked Daniel quietly, words barely catching her trembling excitement, and stepped back to let him pack up his guitar, but her mind was already moving ahead, imagining what she could create now that she had been reminded of the courage and support she had within her. That night, after Daniel left with a shy smile and a quiet thank you, Emma walked down the hallway toward her old art studio, the small room at the back of the house where dust covered. Canvases leaned against the walls and the scent of old paint still lingered faintly in the air. She hesitated for a moment at the doorway, letting her hand brush the edge of the wooden frame, breathing in the familiar smell, feeling the weight of years of grief and fear pressing against her chest. And then, with a deep breath that felt like the first real one she had taken in a long time, she stepped inside. Her eyes fell on a blank canvas that had never been touched, and the sight of it, white and inviting, filled her with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She set down her coat and began to organize her brushes and paints, careful at first, as if testing the waters of her own courage. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up a brush, dipped it into the paint, and touched it to the canvas. The first stroke was hesitant, imperfect, but it felt alive in a way she hadn't felt in years, as if the act of creating itself was an affirmation that she could move forward, that she could feel, that she could live. The colors flowed under her brush, bright, messy, bold. As she allowed her emotions, grief, hope, longing, excitement, to pour into every line, every curve, every splash, she painted quickly, almost frantically, as if trying to make up for the lost years. As if the canvas could catch all the pieces of her heart she had kept hidden. The studio felt warmer, the shadows smaller. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of joy that was untainted by sorrow. A sense of life that was messy, vibrant, and real. She thought about Ethan, about the way his question had unlocked something in her. And she realized she had been waiting for permission from herself all along. Not from anyone else, to reclaim her life, her passions, her ability to feel deeply again. The memory of his supportive presence that evening reminded her that people who care about you don't demand you be perfect or move at the pace they want. They simply witness your journey, and sometimes that witnessing is enough to give you the courage to take the first step. Hours passed without her noticing, as she painted with a mix of focus and abandon, letting every emotion guide her hand, letting the music of memory and hope drive the colors across the canvas. Each stroke felt like a step forward, a step away from the weight of grief, from the fear of vulnerability, from the life she had built around quiet survival instead of joy. When she finally set down her brush, exhausted but exhilarated, she stepped back and looked at the canvas, marveling at the way the colors seemed to reflect not only her emotions, but the possibility of what her life could become. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and that realization filled her with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. She understood that the night's events, Daniel's song, Ethan's question, the quiet encouragement from people who cared had not only reminded her who she was, but had also opened a door to who she could be, someone who dared to feel, to create, to connect, to love again. Emma finally left the studio, tired but smiling, her heart lighter than it had been in years. And as she looked out at the rain-soaked street through the window, she felt a thrilling sense of anticipation. The future was uncertain, messy, and full of possibilities. But for the first time in a long time, she was ready to step into it fully awake, fully present and fully alive. The night had started with a simple act, Daniel asking her to listen, Ethan asking a question, but it ended with Emma reclaiming her courage, her creativity, and her joy, realizing that healing often comes in small, quiet moments that lead to the biggest transformations, and that life, in all its unpredictable beauty, was waiting for her to take that first brushstroke,